All right, so we are going to go ahead and get started with our very first webinar of our Spring 2024 webinar series. So today I'll be chatting a little bit about inclusive higher education in general across the state of Colorado, and then I will dive more specifically into the application process if you are interested in going that route. So just kind of with that, hello, welcome, thanks for joining. Just quickly a link to our rest of our spring webinar schedule. If there's anything that catches your eye, sign up. Just another kind of reminder, this is recorded, so there is Q&A time allotted throughout, but if you want a more private recording where you're not necessarily on the recording that will be sent out, you can always save it for the very end, and then I will stop recording at that time. At the very end, you will get a screen that pops up on your web browser that just says, click continue to take a survey. It's like a quick, just 30-second, let us know what you wish would have been part of this, just kind of more general feedback about presentations in general. So it'd be really great if you did that. And then just sort of a last FYI that this recording and then related resources will be sent out tomorrow as well. So you can always refer back at a later day. So just kind of with that to kick us off, get us started, IN is a nonprofit that creates inclusive college opportunities specifically for students with intellectual disability. And these programs have four main focuses, or we kind of call them the four pillars of inclusive higher education. So those are academic growth, social development, career advancement, and then finally independence. So IN kind of has four main goals, which you'll see here. These webinars kind of fall under the education and outreach portions, but sort of all of that is just to say that IN is the nonprofit. We don't provide direct services on campuses for students. We sort of work with campus staff and families on a more broad scale. But if you have really specific questions, then I will guide you to our staff on campuses. So just kind of a little FYI. And then with that, this is the IN team. We're small but mighty. There's just three of us. I'm down there at the bottom. I'm Elise Kramer. I'm our program coordinator. And at any point, feel free to send us emails, text messages, phone calls. We really like being involved with families kind of all throughout the inclusive higher ed process. So don't hesitate to reach out. That's what we're here for. And then with that, we will get going with our agenda for the day. So we will begin by just kind of going through the general inclusive higher education opportunities in Colorado. Then we will chat about the more general admissions and applications process that will apply to all inclusive higher ed programs in the state. And then we'll kind of dive into more specific program by program details. And then I will end with resources and then leave you free to enjoy your evening. So with that, we just have three webinar objectives that I hope you end with in the day. So the first one, just know what the inclusive higher ed options are. Second one, know what your sort of general admissions expectations should be. And then third one, know what those specific admissions expectations are. So let's jump right in to understanding inclusive higher ed across the state, which really begins with sort of understanding it on a national level. So this is not a whole slide that I will read. There's a lot of information here. Really what I want to draw your eye to is that middle section. So in 2008, the federal government passed a law that said that students with intellectual disability can be on college campuses if the campuses allow them to be there. So basically, it provided access to college for students with intellectual disability. So in 2008, programs all across the country started popping up to serve students with ID. And in 2016, Colorado was one of three states that had not yet followed that trend and established programs. So the state of Colorado, our legislature passed a law that allowed 3 pilot schools to receive funding to open programs. In 2022, they passed more legislation to provide more money for new programs to launch. And so today we have 4. In August, we will have 6. And then ideally next August, we'll have 8. So I'll talk about what that looks like here in a few slides. But just to kind of keep in the back of your mind what this trajectory is. And if a lot of this is new, it may be because these programs didn't exist when your students were coming up through the K-12 system, depending on their age. So some of that is just kind of to keep in the back of your mind. They're relatively new, but at least in Colorado, we got running pretty quickly, which is pretty awesome. So just a brief description of what inclusive higher education is. So these are programs that specifically offer an alternative admissions pathway for students with intellectual disability. There's an asterisk there because there are some disabilities that are not specifically qualified as intellectual disability, but that may still, these may still be the right programs for those students. So I'm not going to actually speak about that in too much detail, just because our March webinar is going to go into that, in it for an hour long, what kinds of college programs would be right for what students. So look out for that. Just kind of know these programs are fully inclusive, they're fully normative, they are not segregated special education courses on a college campus. Students take courses that align with their career goal specifically, but they are the same courses with the same professors at the same time as all of their typical peers. So they are very, very included, but knowing that they get supports. So students in these programs receive both accommodations and modifications. Students who have more traditional disabilities, maybe think something like ADHD, dyslexia, something like that, they are eligible for accommodations, but not modifications. And so that's the difference, that there is a difference in scope of what they're learning. So kind of the, easy to understand example of that is if the professor says everybody needs to write a 5-page paper, an accommodation would be, all right, you get a week extra to write that 5-page paper. A modification would be, okay, instead of a 5-page paper, maybe it's a 1-page paper, or maybe it's a slideshow or a presentation or something like that. And so the actual assignment, the scope of the assignment is a little bit different. That's where the modification falls. Because these students receive modifications, they earn a certificate. They do not earn a degree. And so that is part of that initial federal legislation and part of a lot of education legislation, that if students receive a modified credential or modified course load, they cannot earn a degree. And so we'll chat about that in a few slides. Just kind of know that that credential, even though it is not an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree, it still has weight, it still has meaning. It's still very, students are very, very proud to have that credential. They still put in a lot of time and effort and, kind of the same traditional blood, sweat, and tears that normative college students might put in. And so it's still something to be proud of. And again, I'll come back to that. Students in IHE participate in career readiness and independent living. And more specifically, they have staff support as well as peer mentor support in all 4 of those pillars of inclusive higher education, which again are academics, social involvement, career advancement, and then independence. And so it really is kind of a, all hands on deck support of students to help have very bright, positive, independent futures. And then I'm going to go into what our programs are in Colorado that offer these supports for students. So the first one is the Elevate program at Arapahoe Community College. They have had a program at their Littleton campus since 2016. And then starting this semester, literally today, they also expanded that program to their extension satellite campus in Castle Rock, Colorado, which is really exciting. As a community college, it's a commuter campus, so they don't offer on-campus living for any student, nor do they for students in the Elevate program. It's a little bit shorter, on the shorter end, which is normative for community college, and this is a 3-year program. Then we have the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. The Office of Inclusive Services is their IHE program. This is more of a traditional college experience in that students can live on campus. It is a 4-year program. Sort of the difference in their on-campus living is that they don't have those traditional dorms that I lived in when I was in college. They live in on-campus apartments. And so they have on-campus, or in their apartments, they have, kitchens and bathrooms and laundry and all of that's on site. So it's a little bit more luxurious perhaps than traditional college students would experience. And then the Goal program, Go On and Learn at the University of Northern Colorado. That's in Greeley, also a 4-year program. And they do have that pretty traditional on-campus dorm living where, they do have kitchens and laundry and bathrooms, but it's much more communal in open spaces with the rest of the peers in the dorm as well. So just kind of differences in the living experiences. And then in August of 2022, the Regis University Global Inclusive Program launched. That's in Denver, Colorado. They do have on-campus living, again, in pretty traditional dorm, more rugged style living. And they have 2 options right now. So they have a 1-year track and a 2-year track. And then again, they launched in August of 2022, so they're still newer. So kind of as they get their feet under them and the program expands, they will eventually have probably a more 3 to 4 year track. It just doesn't exist yet, but it is to come. And then all of these programs are what we call CTP certified. Basically what that means for families is that students who are in these programs are eligible to receive federal financial aid in the form of work study and grants. They are not, unfortunately, eligible to receive federal loans, federal student loans, because they are not degree-seeking students. And so that's one caveat. We do have a whole webinar from last fall that specifically talks about how to help pay for college. And so I can send that out if that's a specific question that anyone has. But just know there's some aid, there's also private scholarships, things like that. And then all of these programs, all these students receive what we call the statewide comprehensive education certificate. So again, that's the outcome. It's not a degree. It is what we call the CHEC, comprehensive higher education certificate. What's really cool is that is accredited by the Colorado Department of Higher Education, which means it's transferable. So let's say a student starts out at, let's just say ACC, they want to live at home for a year, and then they decide, no, I'm ready to go, live on campus somewhere. They can take their credits, their classes, all that with them to any other school in the state that is CTP certified. And so that is a normative aspect of that. And then the other thing is that that certificate still shows a really weighty, really meaningful outcome. It still shows employers that while students were in school, they spent 2, 3, 4 years really learning kind of the ins and outs of whatever that employment goal would be, whatever that profession is. And so it's something that many of our graduates have taken to employers, and they've been able to say, look, I'm very skilled, I'm specifically trained in this, and employers have sort of taken that as their, I don't want to say reason, but they're sort of convincing that, yeah, these are really great employees, we should definitely hire them. So still very meaningful, still very important. And again, it's something that our graduates are very, very proud to have. And then in August, just in a few months from now, 2 new programs will launch. So in Fort Collins at CSU, the Rams Scholars Program will begin. That program is really cool in that it is specifically focused on farming and ranching and agriculture and much more hands-on experiential learning, at least for the first while. They may eventually broaden their focus, but just because that's what CSU is kind of known for. As the A&M university in the state, that's how they're launching, which is really exciting. And then for the very, very first year, if not 2, they do not plan to have on-campus living, just kind of while they get the rest of the program under their feet. They will eventually have on-campus living, again, in our traditional rugged style dorms, just not for this upcoming August. And then the Metropolitan State University of Denver, or MSU Denver, is launching the Inclusive Higher Education Solutions Program. That, again, at the Auraria campus there, they don't have on-campus living for anyone, so they won't probably ever. So that would also be a commuter campus, but exciting to have more options in the Denver metro area. And then just as of today, a new grant application launched for new schools to apply to open their doors in fall of 2025. So ideally, that will be one more rural university, maybe on the eastern or western slope of Colorado, and then at least one more community college. So stay tuned. Hopefully in the next few years, we will have 8 opportunities for students with ID to receive a higher education. All right, so are there any questions just kind of based on the overarching information so far? All right, then we will keep rolling through. So next, I'm going to share just more general things that will apply no matter which university or college program students apply to, just kind of more general things to keep in mind. So to begin, and again, this varies from school to school, like does everything, but there is sort of a general timeline and a general flow, and that's applications will open in the winter, typically early December, maybe sometimes into January. And then in the springtime, interviews will start to begin for those programs. So we'll talk about what those interviews look like later down the line. Just kind of keep that general timeline in mind. But then again, knowing that they all kind of vary, they all range. So we do keep an updated blog post on our website. There's a link right there to that blog post. So when you get this slideshow, feel free to click through that, bookmark it, look back at it whenever you're curious. And then Something that's possibly a little bit different from typical college campuses. So you'll apply directly through the inclusive office. The typical admissions office on the campus will not facilitate the admissions for these specific programs. In also doesn't. So, sometimes we'll get an errant letter of recommendation or things like that. Just kind of remember, we don't facilitate admissions. They all go through the specific inclusive higher education office. And then the specific application requirements will vary, but they all will include something like a student questionnaire, some kind of input or questionnaire from the guardians or the caretakers. They'll include letters of recommendations, and then they just want to make sure that students are eligible from a disability perspective. Do they have an intellectual disability or a need for modifications? So because of that, they will ask for disability documentation. And again, that will slightly change from program to program. Just kind of keep those general things in mind. And then as we go through just other basic admission criteria, of course, as I just mentioned, they must have a documented intellectual disability or other need to have a modified course curriculum. They need to have a desire to go to college. And so the reason why this one is bolded is that sometimes very, very well-meaning parents will encourage their students to apply to college, but it's not really the student who has the intrinsic desire to go. But it's not the parent, right, who's going to classes and meeting up with peer mentors to study for tests and all that kinds of stuff. It's really on the student to put in the effort, the time, the energy to be successful in college. And so that's what I sort of want to remind people. It's really important that the student has their own desire to go to college, independent of parents and educators and things like that. Not that they can't have a whole support system. They should. We hope for that. It's just that we want to make sure that students have their own motivation, and almost all of the application processes will include some part to kind of figure out how big is that motivation, right? Is it really the student who wants to go? So again, just some kind of reminders with that. It's the student who will be participating in class and activities with support, but it is the student who has to put forth the effort to make that happen. Students also have to be able to follow the same code of conduct as every other student on their college campus. The students will sign that code of conduct. There, are still behavior expectations and things. Students will go through the same, behavior remediation processes as every other students through their university dean's offices and things like that. So that is just something to sort of keep in mind. Students do have to be able to follow the code of conduct. And then lastly, students have to wish to engage in vocational training, vocational experiences. There is a whole job trajectory where students kind of build up to training for their specific job that they ideally want after graduation. And so that is an added component in addition to the academics. There is a career sort of internship piece as well. So that's something to keep in mind. And then just some additional FYIs, things to keep in mind. So what's not included that might be included in a traditional college admissions process. So they're not going to ask for a high school diploma because not every student who goes through a transitions program has a diploma. Some students only have a certificate of completion. So that's okay. If all they have is that certificate of completion, totally fine. That's accepted. That works. It's not required that they have a diploma. So don't worry if your student does not. They're not going to look for things like GPA minimums. They're not going to ask for, how many AP or IB courses did you take? No need to worry about ACT or SAT scores or anything like that. Sometimes I'll hear traditional high school juniors or seniors say things like, well, I need to join more clubs or volunteer or whatever because I need, to put them on my resume for college. That kind of stuff is not necessarily expected of the students while they're in high school and in their transitions programs. There's not going to be anything like an alumni interview. So in some senses, it is pretty normative, and in other senses, it's not. And so just kind of keep in mind that these are the things that you don't need to necessarily worry about as you're preparing your students for inclusive higher ed. And I will talk about throughout this process, this webinar, the elements that you will need to worry about. These are just not those. So there are some normative sort of recommendations that we have. The first one is tour campuses. Get a feel for the campus climate, the culture. Are these buildings that you want to look at every single day? And just kind of, meet the staff, the other students, and just get to know the school. That's something that I would recommend of any student who's looking into any college. And in fact, I chatted with a student in one of our inclusive higher ed programs last week, and she toured campuses around Colorado. She was also looking at campuses in other states to potentially be an out-of-state student. And she said she knew. She walked on the campus that she ended up, going to that program, and she immediately knew. She said, I walked on campus and I just knew this was home. I felt comfortable. I felt excited. And so those are things that we encourage families to do with their students. And that can be done through the traditional admissions office, just go through their typical tour process and all that kinds of stuff. And one of the opportunities that does is that allows you to sort of see how, and your student to sort of see how do the other typical students on campus interact with your student? What is their campus culture and climate with regards to disability and things like that? And so that kind of has a lot of purposes and effects, and that's something that I cannot stress enough. It's also important to consider, both for the student, but also for the family, what is the distance that a student is okay with living away from home, or sometimes it's the parent saying, I really want you closer. So just kind of negotiating that for your family. Would you rather be a commuter student, or maybe you do live on campus, but you're within 20 minutes of mom and dad? Maybe you're okay with living a 4-hour drive or out of state or whatever. So those are just important things to know, right? It's hard on day 2 to say, oh my gosh, I'm too far. I wish I was closer, right? Those are maybe some things to think about ahead of time. It's also important to research the availability of whatever your student wants to study at each school. So the kind of cool thing about students in their area of study within inclusive higher education is they can sort of piecemeal their own area of study. So if a school doesn't necessarily have a major, let's say they don't have a major in Greek history, but your student really wants to study Greek history, and I'm just making that up, they can take random classes, not random, but specific classes from the university course book, and they can kind of piecemeal those classes together to create their own area of study. So a much better example, an example that actually happened, is a student wanted to own his own photography company. And so he took classes in business and in marketing, but he also took classes in photography and arts and graphic design and all kinds of stuff to help kind of give him the skill set he needed to create his own photography company after graduation. Let's say that particular campus only had one photography class. Well, he could take that one photography class, but he probably couldn't get very far in creating a whole area of study around it. And so that's just something that you can just Google, university, and then whatever area of study your student is interested in, Greek history or whatever it is, and kind of figure that out. You can also reach out to the different program directors, and they can help you with that as well. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you are a family who needs financial aid, definitely be sure to fill out the FAFSA, which is the federal financial aid form, also the CASPA, which is the Colorado state-specific financial aid form. So be sure to do that throughout the application process. And then again, this is normative. Ask teachers, dance coaches, whatever, for letters of recommendation. And then kind of related to that, just make sure you're gathering and organizing all the required documentation. If you're applying to multiple inclusive higher ed offices, then you'll need that documentation over and over and over again. So just keep it somewhere where you can access it. And then people kind of ask, what is the admissions decision process? What do they weight their decisions on? And really, it is a very holistic decision-making process. So there is not more weight given to this aspect rather than that aspect. Part of the sort of admissions process is an interview to get to know students and really just get to know, is the program right for the student? Is the student right for the program? And so kind of questions that they'll try to hammer down on are the learning needs and the students, again, their own intrinsic desire to attend college. They'll ask the student, do they really want to engage in instruction regarding all 4 pillars of inclusive higher ed? Reminder, that's academics, social engagement, career, and independence. Or maybe they're only there for 1 or 2 pillars, which they could get more specific, targeted instruction in elsewhere. They definitely want to know that students have, that the office has the ability to meet students' needs, to meet their goals, again, depending on what those are, and that's different for every student. So that's part of that sort of specific interview process. They also want to know students' skill level. So they'll want to know, what is their ability to participate in coursework, in campus life, of course with support, but knowing that there's going to be some downtime. Sometimes students will be by themselves as they transition from classes to classes or building to building. potentially in some non-academic or social activities, times like that. So they'll just want to make sure that students can successfully navigate and negotiate those times at least a little bit on their own. And then they want to know what the commitment is from the student's family in supporting the goals of the student during college, but then also beyond, right? Who's going to be helping the student work with DVR, various agencies after college to make sure that they are continually working on skills and accessing services and things like that. So again, that's very general. They all kind of have their own, twists and things like that. Before we get into that, are there any questions? And I'm noticing in the chat, this is a question about tuition. Is the tuition the same as degree-seeking tuition? Are there any extra fees for the programs? That's a really great question. Yes, so the tuition in terms of cost per credit hour is the same for all students on the college campus. So that aspect is normative. In terms of the additional program fee, they all kind of operate differently. Most of them do have an additional fee to pay for the peer mentors, the career coaching, all that kinds of stuff. Some of our campuses, that is charged as additional credit hours. So they may say, we're enrolling you in 2 credit hours of advising, and then it's from that money that it comes, that goes to the program. So they sort of vary. But yes, in general, the cost per credit hour is the same, just kind of knowing that students do take fewer credits. So if a traditional student takes 15 credits as full-time, for our students in inclusive higher ed, it's typically 9 credits. So it's typically 2 content classes that kind of, helps them get to their career goal. And then they'll have 1 class that is separate, that is just for students in inclusive higher ed. And in that class, they'll have targeted instruction in how to write a resume, in independent living skills, in lots of different things like that may not apply to general students on the college campus. So cost per credit hour is the same, fewer credits overall. And that's a really great question. Anything else? All right, we will keep chugging, and there's more time for questions throughout. So these are more specific per school considerations. Just kind of know before we get there. I only have 1 slide for each school, just so that it's not super overwhelming, and so that we can remain in the time constraints. If you have additional questions, I highly encourage you to go to each office's website, which is linked on each slide. You can do some more research there. You can always reach out after this as you're kind of realizing, I forgot to ask that question, and I'd be happy to help. So just kind of keep that in mind. This is general overview for each program. So the Elevated ACC program, something to consider. Again, it's a commuter campus. So consider, how is your student going to have access to transportation? Some students in the Elevate program drive themselves, if that is something they can do. Some get rides from family members, or they Uber, or they take public transportation. So all of those are just things to consider. If that's too much for your family to figure out, then perhaps this is not the program for your student. So just kind of consider that on the front. The ACC program, as a community college, they do rolling applications, rolling admissions. So they don't really have days or times when their applications open or close. They just kind of review applications as they come in. So that's just something to keep in mind. When you go to their website, on the right side, there's a big purple button that says apply to the Elevate program. So that's how you'll access the application. And as you go through the application, it's pretty clear about what it wants, but just kind of things to keep in mind that it will ask for. The application will ask for both the junior year IEP as well as the most recent IEP. So keep that in mind. You'll need both. So you might need time, depending on how old your student is, to kind of hunt down that junior year IEP, chat with teachers and things like that to find them, but they will need that. They will also require a professional letter of recommendation as well as a personal letter of recommendation. They explain what each of those mean, what they look like. And then if a student is, if they apply after their application is reviewed, they will be welcome on campus for what they call a campus experience day. And so that's time for the student and their family to get to know the campus, get to know the Elevate staff, the other Elevate students, and just kind of figure out, again, is this the right mutual fit for both? Is the student the right fit for the program? Is the program the right fit for the student? As part of that process, they're going to interview the student, and they will also, again, ask for that input from parent, guardian, family member to sort of figure out what does that support system look like at home. And then a week before classes start in August, they will welcome students early for what they call the Summer Bridge program. And so that is a time for students to get to know each other, to get to know campus, to find their classes and learn their schedules, all that kinds of fun stuff. I was there in August, and they did a whole day on caring for your mental health in college. And so it is pretty holistic and pretty broad. That class is something that students earn credit for, so that will go on their transcript, and they will do that Summer Bridge every summer. So it's kind of an orientation process. The RAM Scholars Program, because their sort of program is new this year, their application process is new, they don't have totally everything figured out yet, so they will reach out to families as they apply. This is what they do know so far. So this upcoming fall, again, they will not have on-campus living, so consider your proximity to campus and how students will get there. And then make sure that students have a motivation to specifically develop career skills in the agricultural world. That is something that is specific to this program. Their application will close January 31st, so a few weeks left on that. Occasionally, our programs extend application deadlines depending on members, so keep up to date with our blog post on our website to learn about that in one-stop shop. So once you go to their website, you will read more about their program. They kind of have a whole, how do you know if the RAM Scholars Program is right for my student? If you decide that it is right, select Apply RAM Scholar right at the top. The application pops right up. And then in April or May, they will contact families to let them know if their students have been accepted. That's where they'll give kind of next steps and things like that. So if you're applying to the RAM Scholars Program, stay tuned. Next is the program at MSU Denver, the IHES program. So again, commuter campus, consider how your student is going to access transportation to get to campus. They also accept applications on a rolling basis. That's just an MSU Denver kind of application policy. So when you go to their website, you'll find their student application packet. You'll complete it, you'll submit it. It's pretty clear in there about what it wants, but it does ask for high school transcripts. It asks for the latest IEP or summary of performance. They want 3 references as well as a current physical examination, or most recent, they say within 1 year. And then the applicants and the parent guardian support person will attend a personal interview. Again, that's pretty standard across most of these inclusive higher education options. So just kind of keep that in mind. And then at Regis, the global program, this is a little bit different in that you do initially apply through their traditional admissions office, but then there's a part where you kind of break away and they'll send your application to the global staff. So just keep that in mind. So you will start on the global website. And then if you scroll down, there's a yellow box that says learn how to apply. And when you click it, it pops up with some very, very clear instructions. It says, click this link in this box, type this, check this checkbox, right? So it is very, very explicit on how to fill out their application process, since it does begin with the traditional application form. I started to put them all on the slide. There are a lot of directions and they are very explicit on the global website. So instead of me putting really small font on here, if that program is of interest, you can go ahead and check it out. And then again, it is very explicit. You can't get lost, but if you do, let me know and I'm happy to help. So if students are accepted, they will participate in a person-centered planning meeting. That's pretty standard across all the offices of inclusive higher ed as well. So that's just a time for the staff to get to know the student, get to know what are their goals, what kind of support do they need to help reach those goals, and they create a very specific plan for each individual student. Students will attend a new student orientation. That's 3 days long. That's right before the school year starts. Again, just to get to know campus, find their classes, get to know their peer mentors, staff, each other, all that kinds of fun stuff. And then lastly, they will ask all students to sign that they agree to follow the Regis University rules and regulations, code of conduct, right? That's pretty standard across our universities as well. All right, the UCCS program, OIS. So on their homepage, they have a button at the top that says admissions, and then in that admissions button, there's a big drop down, and there's 2 options. So one of the drop downs is admissions again, and then one of them is applications. So if you select both of those, they have various information in each one that you can kind of look through and read about that program more and what they want. So again, I do recommend that you look through their requirements. They have some unique requirements that are not, that don't apply to the other offices of inclusive higher ed. So one of them, for example, the OIS program says that students must be between the ages of 18 and 26 when they enter the program. At the other schools, as long as you're over the age of 18, you're good to go. The OIS, you have to be 18 to 26. You can be older than 26 when you graduate, but you have to enter before you hit 27, basically. This is another program that does require both the most recent and the junior year IEP. So just keep that in the back of your mind as well. Again, there are other requirements and things listed on their website. These are just a few that stand out as possibly different than other ones. So for them, they will review student applications, and then they will invite students for an interview as well as families for an interview. With staff, again, kind of that same thing. They want to make sure that there's that mutual fit between student and program. And then they will announce decisions either May 1st or hopefully sooner. And when students are admitted, they will attend what they call Mountain Lion Academy. So again, it's multiple days right before the start of the year on campus. Students and parents are there, and it's both new and returning students. So they can all kind of get to know each other, reset, reboot, all together, get on the same page before the start of the year. So that is UCCS. And then last but not least, the UNCC Goal program. So they do really highly encourage campus tours. Again, that's something that everywhere encourages. I certainly encourage that. But they want to make sure that students have visited campus, they've seen what it's like, and they've really kind of lived an hour in the life, if you will. So once you get to their homepage, there's a little button at the top that says, "Is Goal right for me?" Be sure to read through their requirements. They have one unique to them in Colorado requirement, and that students have to be their own guardian. So just keep that in mind. If that's not something that your student fulfills, then this program would not be for them right off the bat. So when you get to their homepage, you'll click apply. Again, it's very explicit on what to do. They have 6 steps, so you just kind of follow exactly what it asks you to do. And then part of the interview process is a day and a half, what they call applied interview. And so that's time for program staff to assess how students navigate novel experiences, how they communicate with others, how they would move around campus. And so this is particularly a time just for program staff to sort of assess the independence level of students, just to sort of see, again, how much support do they need. Staff can only figure out so much through Q&A. It's a lot easier for them to sort of figure it out by observing it. And so this is kind of a time for that to happen. And then if students are selected for the program, they do have a 2-day new student orientation over the summer. That's with staff on campus. So again, that part is pretty typical across all of these programs. All right, do we have any program specific questions? All right, I'm gonna keep rolling, but if you have questions pop up, let me know. Okay, so now I'm just gonna provide you some more general resources that apply to inclusive higher ed more broadly. So if you are interested in kind of learning more about inclusive higher ed, learning more about we have lots of different links here. So one goes to our website. The second one there, I'm gonna specifically chat about, that's our college mentorship program. So this is free, 6 weeks from February. I'm blanking on the dates right now, but it's mid-February to mid-March effectively. So every Thursday afternoon from 4:30 to 5:30 on Zoom. It's for prospective students who maybe they want to go to college, but they just want to learn a little more. Maybe they have no idea if they want to go to college. It's a time for them to talk to some of our current students as well as some of our graduates, just to kind of learn more about their experiences, a day in the life. So maybe they don't know between, let's say, 2 programs. They can meet with students and kind of, figure it out in a pretty low stakes. They're in their own home, right, on Zoom environment. So I do want to plug that. Applications for that close on February 2nd. So I encourage you to click that link, read more, let me know if you have questions. More links to our webinars, sign up for our newsletters, lots of resources there. And then these are really helpful for families who maybe are at the earlier stages of college. So this first one, the Going to College page, that's a website specifically for students with disabilities who are looking into college to kind of help them figure out what they want out of a college experience. It's really interactive. It's a very, very cool tool. So I highly recommend that. That middle link is a guide to all inclusive higher education programs across the country. There are over 300 of them. So if you have a student who might be interested in leaving the state, you can find more programs there. And then lastly is linked to lots and lots and lots of resources for families as they help prepare their students for the transition, everything from financial resources to, what kinds of behaviors and expectations should you have at home, all kinds of stuff. So I highly recommend that last link there. And then just a reminder, the screen will pop up on your search engine before you, or as soon as you leave the Zoom. Would love if you clicked continue, give me some feedback, good, bad, ugly, I want it all. And then with that, I will stop recording so we can have some more question time.